For our next presentation is Mr. Ned DeLoach presenting a topic entitled Dream Fish. Ned DeLoach, co-author with Paul Humann of 9 marine life field guides, discusses his search for biodiversity in the sea, focusing on the rare, beautiful, and bizarre. Ned and his wife Anna, always on the lookout for the unusual, share their recent adventures tracking down pearlfish larvae, flasherwrasses, blennies, and jumping jawfish. I present to you Mr. Ned DeLoach.
Thank you very much, and it's a joy to be here. First MACNA for me, and it's about time. I'm usually associated with the dive industry, and unfortunately I missed several of them because we were in Bonaire during coral spawning season, but here we are this year and glad to be here. And again, thanks to the Bayou Reef Keepers for sponsoring this, and we've been here for the entire show and loving it. Well, I don't keep aquariums, but I'm with kindred spirits out here because I love the nature and the fish and the marine creatures just like you. My job's a little bit different. Along with my partner, Paul Humann, we started in the late 80s. Publishing marine life identification guides, and you might recognize one of them from the black covers of our books. So we've been doing that for quite some time, and it's one of the best gigs in the world. And we get to travel a lot. We're on the road about 5 months out of the year and underwater for most of that. And we are searching for marine life, trying to find it, to document it for our series of books and the tropics around. Let me introduce my wife, Anna, please. She is far and away the best part of this team and best eyes I have underwater. Most of these fishes that we'll show tonight, she has found for me. I take the pictures, I do the writing, but she does the hunting and all the thinking in the group. Also, we over the years have aquarists travel with us, and Bob and Tammy DeWitt, Larry Jackson, and Rob Moogie have been with us on many underwater adventures over the years, and we just have a barrel of fun. Okay. Excuse me for that. Okay, we're going to go start halfway around the world. We'll take you to the Coral Triangle, and why I'm putting this slide up is many of the fishes that we will talk about tonight come from the Coral Triangle. Now, we named the presentation Dream Fish. Just like you have dream fish, we have dream fish too. And usually the combination of the beautiful, the bizarre, the exotic, and the cute cells. And there's a lot of good cute, and you just look at these aquariums around here, and they're just loaded with it. So we dive in the Coral Triangle, a little bit of the history of the Coral Triangle. That is the most prolific area of marine life in the world as far as speciation. And there are several theories for that, but probably the most widely held is that about 20,000 years ago, in the last glacial maxima, when the ice caps encroached on the tropics, all the waters of the world turned temperate, and the tropical water only in this area survived. So all of the tropical fish that had been speciating over the years died out, except in this area. And it has had longer than to speciate, and we have more coral species, more fish species, more invertebrate species than anywhere else. Now, over the thousands of years, the fish have radiated back out as the world's waters warmed and spread. You go east or you go west from the Coral Triangle, and you get fewer and fewer fish till you come around to the Caribbean. Now, that is not to belittle all the other great environments to go diving in to see these animals. One thing we know, wherever you are, you're going to see a different set of species, and it's just exciting. One of the main questions we got asked over the year is, where's your favorite place to go diving? Well, fortunately, the politically correct answer is the right one, where I'm at now. Because you're into the fish and you're looking for those dream fish. Okay, now, very lucky in a lot of ways. The main one is that all of the great natural histories of the world, let's talk about mammals, we talk about reptiles, we talk about insects, have been documented for many, many hundreds and thousands of years because people have been able to interact with it. But if you think about it, we're the first generation in all of mankind that can freely swim with the fishes. Now, they've been studying fish, goes back to Aristotle. But Aristotle was kind of handicapped. The only animals that he got to see are the ones that washed ashore, got caught in nets, maybe a little dredging, and that was it. And then over the years, coming to the great French scientists that really got into ichthyology, they were very limited by what they could dredge up. Even in the last century, the fish that they could bring up were very crude methods. They might put cyanide on the reef, they've dredged the reef, take coral heads, break them apart with hatchets to see what they would find. And those were known as bottle scientists because all of their creatures went into bottle, lost all their wonderful colors, and lost their miraculous behaviors that we get to witness today. Well, in that process, what happened, that left a lot of fabulous animals still down there to be found. In fact, every time we go underwater, and I've been diving for 50 years, every time we go underwater, we feel like we're going to make a great discovery. And it's true. There's just so much to find. Okay, now, this, of course, is a Caribbean reef shark. Why I put it up there is not something we're going to dwell on. The large charismatic megafauna out there, whales, sharks, rays, everybody loves them. But if that's what you're going to go look for when you dive, you're going to be bored a lot because these animals, I call them the expensive animals, because it takes a lot of money to go out and find them, and you don't see much. However, what I tell the audiences of divers, if you will slow down and have the courage to think small, you never have a boring dive. Anna and I love all kinds of nature and bird watchers. We go out and we may spend 3 or 4 hours and see 20, 30 species out in the field, which is really great and enjoyable. But when you're diving, you drop down off the boat. Before you get to the bottom, you're going to see more than 20 different species. And often we'll see over 100 on a particular dive easily. If you love nature and you don't dive, you're kind of missing the boat. So think small, and so we're going to stay small, and of course small fit in your aquariums a lot better. So we're going to start looking for some dream fish here. Okay. When we first went over to the Coral Triangle, it was in the mid-90s, Paul and I had already put together our set of Caribbean books, the fish book, the creature book, and the coral book, and so forth. And we decided, excuse me, to start going around the equator and see what we could see. And we got an eyeful. Well, we had heard about all the iconic fish, and one were the ghost pipefishes. And so this is one thing that captured our minds, and one of the things we wanted to see. This is an ornate ghost pipefish. We're talking about 2.5, 3 inches long, and this is one of the weird fish, and it has all of these spines, and that is so it can mimic that crinoid that it is floating around in. Every animal in the ocean has a great story if you can ferret it out. Our thing is only a few of these we know about. Just like we have a lot of species yet to discover, we haven't even touched the behavior of these animals. That's where you aquarists are coming in with your work. You're doing so much of the discoveries. For instance, these little guys spend 90% of their time in the pelagic as larvae growing. They only come to the reef to become little breeding machines. This is a male that came down and settled on the reef. We were very lucky a few years ago to be in Talomban, in fact, in the late 90s, and we found 3 of these little ornates that had just settled. They weren't even an inch long. They still were translucent from the pelagic. Their tails were just clear snowflakes. And we got to watch them for 10 days before we had to go on and leave Bali. And in those 10 days, we watched them grow so rapidly. And they also got their opacity and they got their colors. And the 3 of them stayed together. And in that process, not only did they grow and get their colors, but one of them, of the 3, turned into a female. And this is the female, and you can tell the difference. We also saw the ventral fins that are very small when they settle, turned into a pouch containing eggs. And by the time we left, the female was growing much more rapidly than the males. One of the males had chased the others off, and she was already getting eggs in the pouch. So they hit the bottom, ready to go and to breed. But there are several different species. We won't show you all, but we'll show you a few. Look at these wonderful guys. These are Halimeda ghost pipefish, and what's so remarkable about this is they love to hang out with the Halimeda algae, the little green in the back. But what I like, well, of course, let me show you here. Here's the little male, the little ventral fin, and here is the larger female, the egg producer, with the big ventral pouch. What I like so much about this is they need to blend into the background. They hang together and move around a very close home range because she is constantly putting new eggs in that pouch, and he wants to be there to fertilize them. So you usually see these in pairs. But in this habitat, the little green guy up there, the smaller male, is mimicking the Halimeda. But because the scroll algae, the white, is nearby, the female has changed to mimic the scroll algae. Remarkable little animals, and we'll be coming back to them a little bit later. You talk about something magnificent. This is a rough snout, just dripping with fins and ornamentation. What is so good about this slide is we were in Limbe Strait, northern Sulawesi diving, and we were in the algae, in the shallows, absolutely no ghost pipefish around. And then one day we found 3 of these guys. We didn't find the little snowflakes. We found full-grown species. And we were just scratching our head. That didn't make much sense to us. But we'll come back to that in a little while. And we're starting to learn over the last 20 years what is happening to them. Okay, and then cute again, the pygmy seahorses. We had to see these, the iconic ones, and so they blend in with their background. We're talking about garbanzo bean-sized little beautiful animals. And there are several species and species still to be discovered. This is the little pentohi, little wafer-thin guy. Very, very difficult to find. Fortunately, in Indonesia, the young Indonesian dive guides have great eyes on them. I kind of think, I mean, they can see things that we cannot even start to see, even with our education of what is down there. And I put a lot of thought to that over the years, and what it seems like to me is we have cityfied eyes. We're not as close to nature anymore. These young men and young women still have the ability to pick out nature from their background. And to find something like this is truly difficult to do. And to find something you've never imagined before is even harder. And there are a lot of things down there that we've never imagined. This also is a little pentohi. For a while, this was called the Severn Seahorse, but in the last decade, they've grouped them together since DNA studies, and so these are actually the same species. And this little string of an animal is a Denise. Now, you talk about super cute. When we came out with our book, Paul and I joined forces with famous ichthyologist Jerry Allen and the Australian photographer Roger Steen, because now when we were in the Caribbean, we had about 400 species to find to put into our books. Now we had over 2,000, and those gentlemen had been working out of Australia for decades and had a nice collection of pictures, but they didn't have them all. And one group they didn't have were the little coral gobies. And the little coral gobies are very shy. They live in shallow water and little plate coral. And so our first book came out, and we only had 1 or 2 out of the about 20 species known. And one of them we wanted to see were these little paragobiodons here, the red-headed coral blenny. And we were in Ambon Harbor, just came back from a liveaboard cruise, and we were diving for a few days. Anna came back after the last dive of the day and said she'd seen some red-headed coral gobies. And oh man, this is really great. So we went to bed that night. We woke up to a storm coming in, and the seawall in front of the lodge, water was coming over it, and the manager of the lodge came and said, "I'm sorry, it's going to be pretty rough to go out there and dive, but if you're going to dive, you need to go out right now, because this is going to build all afternoon." So we talked to Samuel, our dive guide, and he was a go, and I said, well, if I can't photograph these guys, at least I would like to see one, because I'd never seen one before. So we jumped out of the water, swam to the shallows. Anna had found the little coral head, about a foot across, where this little pair was living, and this is a little mated pair living. And we were really in some tough surge, a lot of sand, kicking back and forth. And I was going to be very happy to see them until I saw them come together and pose like that. And I had to have a photograph. It looked like two little puppies in a pound. So cute. But wanting that photograph and getting it is two different things. And I had intentionally overweighted. I had a full tank. I went down to the bottom, and these guys just scurried right to the far side of the coral. I go around to the far side. They scurry back to the other side. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. Samuel, my dive guide, very astute, picked up on it. He went around to the far side so they would come back to this side. Well, that was fine and dandy, but I'm doing manual focus here, and these guys would only sit for a couple of seconds at a time. The swells were coming in. My legs were floating off the bottom. I couldn't keep my eye on the viewfinder. It just wasn't going to work until Anna came along, draped her body across my legs, held me in position, and I was able to get the first picture of these little red-headed coral gobies, which are now in the book. Well, that started a craze. We want to get the other 19 species. So we started working on them, and once you get a search image and you've seen something, you start finding them very quickly. And look at these little panda gobies. And we're talking something about a ½ inch in size. They're just as cool as they can be. And this red spotted goby. Now, these guys live in these little coral gardens, their own little worlds. That's the only place in the world they will go, is in there. And that is for safety. And they're very short-lived species, live a year or so. But they stay in the branches. It's not only getting your lens and see where these little guys are, but it's also getting your strobe in. So what we learn to do is we take satay sticks, those little meat sticks that they have so much, and a dive guide would start fiddling with the fish. That way you didn't hurt the coral, you didn't hurt the fish, you were wrangling these little guys. We started calling them half-hour fish because that is about how long it took to get a picture. I remember this beautiful little red spotted guy was not going to have anything of it. It was such tight interlaced coral branches that I just couldn't get a spot, but every coral has a little defect to it and a little opening. That's the last place that guy wanted to go. But the guide working them, and he finally took a dash across, and I was able to get that photograph. One of the most common, one of the most beautiful is little Gobiodon histrio, the broadband coral goby. Again, what a life story. Listen to this. These guys live in the shallows and only a mated pair to a coral head, but often where they live in the range of high tidal flux, these corals will come completely out of the water. These guys over the ages have adapted to that. They can stay out of the water for up to 4 hours. Now, how do they do that? The scientists have learned with these, they will take a drop of water while they're out, they run it through their mouth, out their operculum. They have a little channel under their jaw. It picks up oxygen as it transfers back to the mouth, runs through the gill again, over and over for that 4 hours until the tide comes back to keep them alive. There is cute, and then there's goofy cute. And Blennies, we love Blennies. My wife's blog is called BlennyWatcher.com. You might want to check it out. It's full of our adventures and our friends' adventures. But Blennies often live in the ultra shallows where there's a lot of surge. It's places where you could break your collarbone and your leg. But it's the greatest game to go in and try to take pictures. So they're in the shallows, usually up on top of rock bommies, and you have to go in there and be game. You wrap your leg around cowboy style off of an old rock, and you try to hold yourself in place till you can get these guys to pose for you. And they're forever goofy, like I said. Look at these guys. These are throat spot. I'd wondered why they call them throat spot till I saw a nuptial male, and you can see from that angle where he got the common name. And look at this guy, just endlessly beautiful. Wouldn't you like that in your aquarium, staring out at you every morning while you're having your coffee? Midas Blennies. These guys are social mimics. They live with the Anthias, and they look a lot like Anthias. They change colors from this yellow to a mauve color. And Anna came back to the liverboard one day and said, "Ned, you just got to go. I've seen some Midas Blennies you won't believe." And so we went over to the shallows, and sure enough, look closely at this. This is in its normal phase. There is its nuptial phase right there. And these guys had sex on their mind. I mean, they were in bizarro world. And they were flying around, actually flying right up to the camera, which I loved. And were challenging me. We got the entire series of them laying eggs. It was a very exciting day. Anna posted this on the Blenny Watcher blog, and scientists started a little debate because of these long fins here and all of these fins that they normally don't have. And what the scientists are thinking is these Blennies, when they get pumped with the pheromones, their fins start expanding during their nuptial phase that lasts several days. Now we're back to the Caribbean. They're only in about a foot of water. These are Molly Millers, and look at that haircut we've got right up there. The little cirri on top of the head, and as cute as they can be. Why one of them is upside down? That is a she, and she's laying eggs, and she's turning in a circle, and he has that little grin on his face, and because he's going to fertilize those eggs as soon as she gets through, and she would pop out and another female would pop in, so he stayed happy all morning long. Now we're getting to the beauty. This is the ocean's Peacocktail. These are flasherwrasses, and we got into flasherwrasses about 12 years ago, and we're addicted with these animals. They're just stupendous underwater, especially in the afternoon. Every afternoon, about 4 to 4:30, they will go into their nuptial phase, and that is when they're so beautiful as we see now. Why they're called flasherwrasses is they do not turn their colors on until they are sexually active. The rest of the time, very few people, divers, don't even notice them. First of all, they're down about 60 feet. They're very cryptic. They live in rubble, or they live in algae, and they hide there. And they're in mass schools, and everything would love to eat them. But as it starts getting dark, then they get excited. and that is when they'll put on their brightest colors, stretch their fins. This is a Filamentous. We thought a few years ago it was only one species. Now it's a complex of 3. This is in the Solomon Islands. As we go through the Coral Triangle, you see different groups of these flasherwrasses. But what will happen is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the little females start getting gravid with eggs and fat. Now, they're very nondescript, but these guys are out there putting on a show. As Darwin introduced to the world in 1871 in Descent of Man, he introduced the idea of sexual selection, which was terribly controversial back in Victorian times. I mean, Victorian men could not get their head around the idea that a female of any species had a say in who she was going to mate with. But now we know different. So the people that were just starting to settle in with natural selection as the great phenomena, the great driver of biological diversity that it is, at the time, hated, just like Darwin did, he hated the idea of sexual selection because it flew in the face of natural selection. Natural selection is everything is for a purpose. Everything is to keep you alive so you can be reproductively active. But if you're dripping with fins and have such bright colors, what do you attract? Not only females, you attract predators. That is why it's late in the afternoon, and these guys will start, and when they start, it is a show. We are talking about hundreds of them going off at one time, flashing, and there's usually several different species, and the females, and trying to take a picture of these is just really quite a challenge. And you're seeing the winning pictures. You didn't see the 882 misses trying to get these guys. Imagine you being out in a garden with your little Instamatic camera trying to take a bumblebee in flight. That's about what you got going on. But a challenge is great, and we were up to it. So we started taking pictures with these. We'll run through. This is one of the filamented. We come back to central Indonesia. Look at this guy, just absolutely covered with fins. This is another thing. We have the terminal males in the wrasse. We have the juveniles, the initial phase. It can be male or female. And then the terminal male. And some of these are super terminal males. They got all of these fins. And your eye can spot them as they're dashing around. And that's the one that the camera tends to focus on. And this is another. These guys, in their wild pandemonium of mating, they will often interbreed, and there is a lot of different hybrids. Now, it's very interesting. We'd been working on flasher bass in Limbe and northern Sulawesi for a couple of 3 years, and we arrived one spring and we saw this fish. Never seen it before. Turned out to be a species called the Togian flasher because it was found one place in the world. That was the Togian Islands, which are 450 miles away from Sulawesi. And suddenly they were in Sulawesi. And so I photographed them, sent them to Jerry Allen, and he said, yeah, that's a first range extinction. So it's not just endemic. So we were really thrilled with this, and what a beautiful, beautiful fish it is. And so we left for home. 6 months later, we came back. And this is what we found. This is a hybrid between the Filamentous and the Togian flasher. So we were seeing evolution in action. It can happen much faster. Now, the Togians, when we came back in another 6 months, they were gone, the hybrids were gone. So these were some waifs from the pelagic that had come in and settled. And that's what we were photographing. Then for 6 years, there were no Togians. Last year we were there and the Togians were there. We will be talking about that toward the end of the show, how this phenomena happens, but it is the early pelagic life stage of these little larval fishes, and they get caught in the currents and they get carried out of their normal range. And that's how the genetic spreads around, and that was what was happening. So we started traveling. You go to the Solomon Islands, look at this beauty, a red-tailed flasher. You go up to the Philippines, scarlet fin flashers. Now, all of these are photographed during their nuptial carryings on. Now, they will flash their fins in the daytime, kind of keeping their harem interested in them until the afternoon, but they never have the intensity of this with all of their fins so spread and their colors so dramatic, except during the nuptial part of the day. Now, just this year, we got to go back to a place we had dived years ago called Trident Bay over in West Papua. This is a very primitive part of the world, and no boats were allowed in for the last 6 years because they had had some problems with the natives. You might remember the story about Michael Rockefeller in the 60s collecting the Asmat art over here. We were within miles of where he was eaten. And as it turned out, it wasn't a crocodile that ate him. So it's a pretty wild part of the world, but we were glad to be in. Conservation International is very active over there, setting up marine reserves. They had started talking to the locals, working with the locals, and now it's very safe to go in. We were excited because Jerry Allen, the ichthyologist I had referenced earlier, had gone in with Conservation International to study the area, and they found it's a hotbed of indecision over there because of its nature of the very tight bays. And he had named a place Flasher Reef. And boy, that caught our imagination. So when we went back this last year, we went to Flasher Beach. And boy, it lives up to his name. This place went off in the afternoon. These are some of the fish. This is the yellowfin flasher that is there. Also the blue flasher. And the Nasalem flasher. These were the three that were mainly in the groups, mixed in with Cerulabris. Also the fairy wrasse. It was a carrying on. Things were going everywhere in the afternoon. And what happened, we found another hybrid. And this looks to be the hybrid from the Nasalem and the blue flasher, but it is actually turned into the male. Now, usually hybrids are not fertile, but in the case of flasherwrasses, they are fertile. Not only are they fertile, they can back cross. So you have all of these elaborate, beautiful fish going on around you. Always a surprise in the ocean, always. Right in the middle of all of this was a sailfin anthias, a fish that I never thought I would ever see. They're well below 100 feet. We were in 35 feet of water. And these guys were up spawning, and they had their nuptial colors on. And this was going on. So it was really a circus. And we tried to spend every afternoon we could at Flasher Beach. Okay, studying these over the last 10 or 12 years, Anna and I love the biodiversity, and that's kind of how we make our money, putting the guides together, but our real love is the behavior of the fish. And so we would watch these fish so closely. Anna would videotape it, would slow it down, try to figure out what in the world. Okay, we've got it down. This little guy has his little harem over here, and he has part of his harem over here, and he's zipping back to one area to the other, and you've got it all sorted out. We go to another region, it's entirely different. So not only are their looks different, but their behavior's different. This is something we saw at Flasher Beach and never seen anywhere. Right in the middle of all of this flashing, jetting around craziness of the spawning, these little groups would ball up and get together. There's 3 different flashers in here, and if you look, these are the females, just as fat with eggs as they can be. And yet these guys are not flashing. They're doing nothing, and these, as fast as they would form, would dissolve, and then they would go back into the pandemonium. So we're still trying to sort all of this stuff out. I did find out there is one way to get a picture of a flasher without him going 9 million miles an hour, and they'll stop every now and then. Little blue-striped cleaning wrasse, long enough for him to pluck a little gathered isopods off of him. And when they do, they'll stretch their fins, making access to the parasite load. Now, we are trying to find fish that we know exist out there that haven't been photographically documented, but we run into new species. Anna spotted this in '96. It is the newest entry into the flasher wrasse, and this we named Alfiani. We got the naming rights, and Anna named it after our dive guide who was with us and does so much for us. And boy, you talk about a beautiful flasher. And we were just back diving with them again a few months ago. They are very isolated. We found them in 3 different little island pockets down by Allure, but just a gorgeous flasher. In the same region, Anna, once again, found a new Cerulabris, a fairy wrasse, that had never been spotted before. Now, you can take a picture. All a picture will do for the scientist is let them know that there's a possibility of new species out there. You have got to collect them, and they have to have multiple fishes, and trying to collect these guys is pretty tough. And it's also very tough to get a collecting permit. I would say marine aquarists can get collecting permits so much easier than science. It's crazy. But all over the world, especially in the third world countries, they've just been ripped off so much that they really don't like to give out collecting permits, and it's a big loophole. Fortunately, we go through Conservation International. Even took that magnificent organization years to get a collecting permit. So we're able to collect under their permit, and we collected this. Sure enough, it's a new species, and Anna again had the naming rights, and she named it after our illustrious partner, Paul Humann, Pipefish humani. Also, this is another one that was just named this year that we had found years ago. We were in Tolombin going down the slope. I'm not so good there on these little fang blennies. There's quite a few of them out there, and they can be rather nondescript. But I was going down the slope, and I saw something dodging a hole that caught my eye. So I lay down in the sand, waiting till it came out of the hole, and I'm glad I did. Took 50 minutes at 50 feet. We had just gotten there. The dive guide didn't know who we were. He was very worried about me. He would go up to Anna and do like this, that I was asleep, but I was waiting. Finally, 50 minutes later, this guy popped up. I was able to take the picture. We got back to the lodge. We sent it to Jerry Allen and Mark Erdman of Conservation International, and they said collect it. Unfortunately, we were leaving that evening also, so Mark came to Bali, went out and collected it. We had one species, and we sent it to ichthyologist William Smith Van Ez, who's a Blenny expert and a flying Blenny superstar expert, and he said it's a new species, but we only have one individual. So for 5 years, Anna and I looked for others, and 2 years ago we found a male and a female hundreds of miles away, and we'll collect them and sent them to Dr. Smith Van Ez, and he described it, and so that is a new genus and a new species of Blenny. So these are just the ones we found. No telling what we have passed over. A little knowledge, though, underwater goes a long way. There's just still a lot of wonderful animals to find. Excuse me. Okay, now we talked about sexual selection. These are two fairy wrasse. Okay, sexual selection, you're showing off for the female, but that's where it stayed for a long time. This was to attract females. Now we know many of these species during sexual selection not only use their beauty to attract females, but also to chase off competing males. These are two Eringia wrasse going side by side in mirror image. Now, if they were to fight each other, there wouldn't be a lot of males left on the reef. But this is the way they compete. So this is comparative comparison of the beauty. We don't know how they pick out who's the winner, but they sure do. So we started looking for sexual selection on the reef in this farm. These are two little gold-spotted sand divers, soda straw size. Everything eats these sand divers. And they call sand divers because they dive under the sand when the predators come up. But these are two males, and instead of running side by side, they go around in a circle. But it does the same thing. Instead of having to fight one another physically, it's comparative beauty. Now, every now and then you see these guys, and it's a tie, and they do have mouth to cuffs. They bite, and they're just ferocious little wars, biting off fins and so forth. So this keeps that to a minimum. Okay, so you're looking for sexual selection. Okay, our little mandarin fish, our little dragonets that spawn every evening also, we've watched them for years. And they compete also right before they spawn, right as the sun is setting, and they go in the circles, spreading all of this, these lovely fins. But this last year, we saw something we've never seen before. Right before the reproductive action started, here are three in a little coral pocket displaying to one another. No belligerency, they just as calm as they could be. Now, what's this all about? It's another reason to scratch your head and keep diving, trying to find these things out. Then we started into the little bitty pipefish. This is a new species that we found in the Solomon Islands. We started learning that these little guys are very symbiotic, living in the Xenia soft coral. And then this last year, while we were in Trident Bay, the Galaxia coral, a little network, we started finding little pipefish. Now that's pretty hard to see them in there. There's his little head. Let me help you out. But as cute as they can be, a little strand of spaghetti, and they just peek out at you. So we started looking in every galaxia head that we could find, and we found this bad boy. And there is a closer look. He looks like a little viper, doesn't he? A snake down in the coral. So there's many of these little hidden animals around. So we got really bold a couple of years ago, and we got off of the equator where we're diving 80-degree water. And we were finding a lot of new stuff, but we knew there were a lot of other animals, so we decided to go to Japan and dive. It was like beginning all over. This boarfish. Every damselfish was new, everything was new. Dragon morays, always wanted to see a pine cone fish. Look at the Blennies. This is voted by Japanese diver as their favorite fish, and it's a little juvenile John Dory. And this little beautiful goby, it wasn't described until 2002, broadband goby, but the real prize that we found was a yet undescribed pygmy seahorse, again about the size of a button. Now, we love behavior. I'm going to go through these real quickly because we have just learned of a sea beyond the sea. 50 years of diving and starting all over. This is not starting all over, and this is a Peacock Flounder, and he is courting, and I will take you through this, and we'll go to the new realm that I'm talking about, but this leads to it. This is a male with a harem right at dusk. People ask me, well, how do you know the fish are about to court? And I say, think of a singles bar about 12:30 on Friday night, and the guys start acting goofy. Well, this is a bottom dweller, and he was acting goofy. He went to his 3 females, which is very important to hydrate their eggs. And here he goes off of the bottom, and this is what they call pelagic or broadcast spawning. This is what 97% of the fish do, and they ride up, that's the female on top, and from 30 feet to 5 feet, they release the gametes, and that happens in a snap of the finger. There's tens of thousands of eggs in there. Now, what they're trying to do is to get their eggs away from the reef. The conventional wisdom is that's to get them away from all the hungry mouths on the reef, but also there's a new theory going around, might be to get them away from the parasite load. So these little nits of fish, little yolk sac larvae, go out into the pelagic, and they develop until they're large enough to come back to the reef. And that's the new realm that we're diving in. Think of about between the size of a quarter and a nickel. That is a juvenile flounder in the pelagic. As gorgeous as that is, it's just like seeing the whole reef over again. We'll go through some of this. We just took these off of West Palm. We go out, there's an operator now, Pura Vida diver. We go out, and 5 miles, they're trying to get that interface between the Gulf Stream and the inland water. That's where everything collects. And they throw a big ball over the side that drifts, and it has a 40-foot line with lights on it. And we get caught in the current, and 3 and 4 knot current. Some nights we go as far as 8 miles in an hour and a half, but it's so peaceful because everything is going together. But this turns into that when it settles back to the reef. Look at this. It turns into a pearlfish. when it settles. So again, it's just a new world. Look at this little beautiful translucent ribbon. That's a lephocephalus of a conger eel. This, BB size, is a little burrfish. Now, these extensions are used for floats to help them adjust their buoyancy and go up and down, trying to stay entrained in the local waters. Turns into a burrfish. Invertebrates, the same. This, with this dorsal spine, they have these dorsal spines so they won't be eaten, and then it develops into a porcelain crab. And then some of the fish, this is a little juvenile moonfish, about $half size. They never settle. They stay out in the pelagic their entire life. So we just started this last year because it's very hard to get offshore. We started swimming for shore. Now we're getting the settling fish, turning into juveniles. This is a 2-inch trunk fish, just coming back from its larval stage. It is getting its opacity. He still has some of his clearness. Look at this little Toby come back, garbanzo bean size, and he actually puffs up for us. And this is banded coral shrimp just floating down to the bottom. We said, well, you're going to get eaten. Well, not so. He gets this aerodynamic and he's gone in an instant. So they have their ways of surviving. So we went over to Indonesia and we started doing it. We're going right offshore. Some of them still are in their early stages here. Little cardinal fish. This is a little blenny. Another pearlfish, their version over from Indonesia. And then you get some that are full-fledged juveniles. This short fin puffer, about 3 inches long, a big eye, long-nosed filefish. So some of them are still in the transitional stage when the sun come ashore, and some of them are juveniles. And going back to our mystery about our rough snout ghost pipefish and why it could be so large. This is a robust ghost pipefish settling to the reef, fully grown and ready to go, unlike the ornate that developed once he got on the reef. Tonguefish, we have no idea what kind of eel. Flying fish, these are juveniles up on the top of the water. There's a mirror image of it. It's just on and on. This is a convict fish. You have them in aquariums. There's about 5,000 in a burrow and 2 or 3 large ones. First time this has been recorded. This is actually an adult swimming down the reef, going to set up a new burrow. Then we came back. We'll end it here. We were in Dominica just last month ago. We went off and we had octopus happening. This is a beautiful guy. The mantle is about as big as a jelly bean, just drifting down and settling. This is an Atlantic long arm octopus. Another looks like a regular octopus. Another little octopus came in, just so small, sent it to all the octopus experts that we know from helping us over the years. They have no idea what these guys are. That is how new and wonderful this ocean is. It's just endlessly with new things. We're ending up, this is a little balloon fish, again, marble size, coming in to settle. And sometimes you get these guys settling randomly, sometimes in great numbers. This is a picture I took a few years ago. They had a settling episode, literally hundreds of these guys, think ping pong ball size. But I'd never seen this before. And this beautiful little cluster, it took me 2 days to get this photograph. We were just back in Dominica taking those settling fishes, and now these little guys are all over the reef. and because they live about 10 years. So this random settling is happening. It's the newest thing in fisheries science, and it's a very good thing, because my last little message, fishermen did not want to have protected areas. If our larvae were just going to float off to Jamaica or some other island, why should we protect them? But they have just learned in the last 15 years that is not the case. They do randomly settle long distances, but they stay near their home reefs. DNA has been, that wonderful tool has helped proving it, and they come back to their natal reefs. So we've got a lot to learn, a lot to see, and thank you for loving nature like we do, and thank you for coming out tonight.